Good afternoon. I am Claudia Schippert. I'm the Executive Director of the American Academy of Religion. Welcome to this webinar. I will begin with a couple of words to contextualize what we're talking about, and we'll then briefly introduce our speakers and participants, and we can go from there. On April 4th, we learned, primarily through a New York Times article that is also posted in the chat, that the US Naval Academy removed 400 books from its college library one day before the US Defense Secretary was to visit the institution. Among those banned books are influential and award-winning books, including several key works in the study of religion in America that specifically address issues of race, gender, and sexuality. We have since learned that, and this is in another New York Times report, initially officials searched the entire library catalog using keywords to identify books that required further review. And this is quoting one of the Navy spokespeople. Approximately 900 books were identified during the preliminary search, and department officials then closely examined preliminary lists to determine which books required removal in order to comply with the executive orders. And as a result, nearly 400 books were selected for removal and were removed from the library. What this means then is that not all books with gender, race, or similarly woke, as it were, terms in the title were banned, but only about half of them after review. As a result, all books deemed critical of racism were removed, whereas books that uphold racist ideology remain. See Hitler's Mein Kampf or The Camp of Saints, a white supremacist novel, are still in the library, whereas, or for example, The Bell Curve, right, also remains, whereas books criticizing assumptions such as Black people are genetically less intelligent than white people were removed. What this means, and I quote from the New York Times article, is that the government department picked sides in the racism debate, and those that examine and criticize historical and current racism against Black Americans lost. On April 10th, the AAR Board of Directors released a statement, which is also linked in the chat, in which the AAR leadership stated that we stand firmly against a growing wave of censorship and restrictions that threaten scholarly freedom in the United States. Book bannings, just like suddenly rescinded grants or publication contracts, quote, not only silence individual scholars, but undermine the collective pursuit of knowledge that is foundational to a democratic society. We're fortunate that today several AAR members who are authors of recently banned books have been able to make the time to talk with us about the dangers of book banning and related efforts to censor, restrict, and control what students and the public can learn, read, and know. In order to save us some time, I'm not going to introduce each of these esteemed scholars in very long introductions. I will post some of that information in the chat as they're talking if you're interested and aren't familiar with their work. But we want to begin with brief statements from each of them, basically answering the question, what is so scary and dangerous about your book, the one that was placed on the banned book list? And we will start with Robbie Jones, and I will post some more information about him in the chat as he starts to answer this question, what makes your book so dangerous? And he will turn it over to the next speaker after he's done. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Claudia. I just want to say I am so grateful for the American Academy of Religion for counting itself among organizations willing to stand up for American values, willing to stand up for academic freedom. So thank you for being so clear and so quick to take this stand in the wake of this very disturbing news. You know, I think it's sometimes hard for us to identify bright lines being crossed when so many things are happening every day. But just to be clear about this, this book ban at the U.S. Naval Academy, PEN America has identified as the first college level book ban in the country. So this is a clear, bright line that's being crossed, and important for us to, I think, stand up and say, no, like this is not an American value. This is not what academic freedom is. And I just want to say one piece of context, and I'll get to my book, is this. It also violates the code, the honor code at the U.S. Naval Academy itself. I think this is like really important to say. They, the honor code, says Naval Academy prepares young men and women to become professional officers of competence, character, and compassion in the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. And the first concept in their honor code reads, midshipmen are persons of integrity. They stand for what is right. They tell the truth and ensure the truth is known. They do not lie. And I think there's nothing more relevant than that. And so, going to my book, so the book that got banned was my 2020 book, and the title was White Too Long: The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. It is probably the most personal book that I've written, and it is me struggling with my own Christian faith. I was raised Southern Baptist, and I begin the book, by saying that the Christian denomination in which I was raised was founded on the principle that enslaving others based on the color of their skin was compatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that's the opening salvo of my book. And the book takes its title from James Baldwin, an op-ed that James Baldwin wrote, where he was writing to white Americans in the wake of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and said, the great majority of white Americans impresses me, and so has impressed me for some time, as being beyond any conceivable hope of moral rehabilitation. They have been white, if I may so put it, too long. They've been married to the lie of white supremacy too long. And really, my book is mostly about me as a straight white guy from Mississippi who grew up Southern Baptist, trying to take that indictment seriously and really trying. But I think the main thing I would point to is what it does is it tries to tell the truth about our history as unflinchingly as I can. And I think that, in a sense, is what really makes it, quote unquote, dangerous from that point of view, is that it actually is telling the truth. It's trying not to lie. And let me throw this to Anthea Butler.
Thanks, Robbie. Hi, I'm Anthea Butler. I'm a professor of religious studies and the Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Religious Thought at the University of Pennsylvania, which unfortunately I have to say has capitulated way too much. And I want that on the record so that they know that I am not looking at them with happy eyes right now. But I think this book right here, my book, White Evangelical Racism, Politics and Morality in America, second edition, and there's a reason why it's second edition, because people don't know this history of American evangelicalism. And I will just start by saying the biggest line in the book is racism is a feature and not a bug of American evangelicalism. And I have had lots of conversations with people about that. But evangelicals have always wanted to tell a nice, happy history about themselves. They wanted to tell the history that they were, against slavery, that they helped missionary work, that they were for lots of other things. But the reality is that you have the Southern Baptists because of slavery. You have white evangelicals who lynched people. You have white evangelicals who made sure that they fought against the civil rights movement. You have white evangelicals who love Donald Trump right now. And so I think very clearly that why my book was taken off is because people hate the truth and people hate history more. And when you hate history and when you don't want to tell the truth about history, especially the history of racism in this country, what you have is a problem. And I'd like to also think, too, that they just decided that they didn't need any books from Black women on there in the first place, which is a whole nother statement altogether, because they know that we have been against this administration. Over 90% of us voted against Donald Trump in the 2024 election. And as we always say, listen to Black women. If you listen to us, you might know what's going on. If you don't listen to us, then you won't know what's going on. So I think for myself, lots of people have said, gee, I wish I was you. This is great. But you also have to know that all of our books being on this list puts us on another kind of list. And I would be remiss if I did not speak of that and say that to you, because I think many of us in the academy right now are looking at what's happening with universities and thinking that this is just going to pass. Folks, it won't pass. It is not going to pass. We're going to have to pass through it, and we're going to have to fight it. And if you don't understand when your colleagues' books are being banned, that the next thing they're going to do is come for you, then you've missed the point. And now I want to pass it on to Jim Wallis.
Well, I'll say just thanks for the great company I'm in here. It's a friend reunion, getting back together again. So thank you for all that. Well, my book was the one that was banned, was America's Original Sin, Racism, White Privilege, and the Bridge to a New America. So Jesus once said, "You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free." We all know that line. But that says to me the opposite of truth isn't just lies, it's captivity. Captivity. And so we have been captive for so long to these lies of white supremacy. And let me go to the grassroots here. I had this conversation. I was a Little League baseball coach for 22 seasons with both my boys. And when they were 12, we'd have a conversation in the dugout. And with permission of Black players and their parents, I raised the issue of the talk that every Black player I ever coached has had with their parents. And none of my white players had that talk. That's in the book, a long section on that. And when the white players heard about this talk their parents had to have with their teammates, classmates, about how to behave in the presence of a police officer, what to do and what not to do, they didn't feel guilty or shamed or responsible for slavery. They felt pissed off that this was happening to their friends. And so I think maybe their parents were more upset than the kids. But I think the truth, back to what Robbie said, the truth will make us free, or the denial of the truth will keep us captive. Frederick Douglass said a long time ago, there are two kinds of Christianity in American history. And our books are about one that aspires to tell the truth, to tell the truth about the most important fact of American history. And so I think truth telling is our salvation in this country. And I think that it's not about our books. It's about a time in the nation's life when the nation has to decide whether we're committed to a multiracial democracy or whether we're not. And the reason the Trump administration is all happening is because of that demographic factor. They want to prevent our changing demography from changing our democracy. That's their strategy. And so the truth is, our souls are at stake. Our faith is at stake. And of course, democracy is at stake because there are still too many white Americans like Robbie and I just are afraid. They're afraid of a multiracial democracy, which in fact is the greatest gift this country has to offer the world. So I'm blessed to be in great company here, and I'll turn it over to Bryan right next to me. Bryan.
Thank you, Jim, and I thank the leadership of the AAR for not only hosting this, but also for raising your voices at this very critical time. Before I get to my book, people have asked me, well, you must feel honored. I mean, this is a badge of honor to be, banned, like with, good company with Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison, whose books are also banned. And we say it in kind of gallows humor. But I always tell them that, deep down, yes, I'm glad to be in the company of the people that are with me on the screen here, who are friends and allies. But also, I feel a sense of outrage. And I feel a sense of dread. And I also feel a deeper sense of resolve, too. What makes my book so dangerous? What makes my book so dangerous, Racial Justice in the Catholic Church, one, I was shocked to find out he was in the Navy Academy's library. But also, what makes it so dangerous is I tell the truth that racial subordination, systems of racial subordination don't just happen. They happen because of human agency, human decisions, and human power. And that we've got a system in this country of the subordination of women and persons of color created by white elite men and kept going and preserved by those who are in alliance with white elite so-called Christian men. And I also point out that the diversity of God's creation is not an accident, that God intended for human beings to be diverse. And this is part of God's marvelous design, and therefore eradicating racial inequality and advancing justice is a holy work of God, and that God is not on the side of those who preserve this unjust system. That's, I think, in a nutshell, what makes the book dangerous. Because it basically is saying that God is not on the side of this anti-DEI crusade that we have going on in this country. And let's be clear that this crusade is not about the eradication or objection to a particular public policy. What we see being done in the name of anti-DEI is nothing less than the systemic erasure and eradication of women, Black people, Latinos, and others who are not deemed worthy from our public life and public memory. I mean, when you're trying to rewrite Harriet Tubman out of the history of the Underground Railroad, that's not anti-DEI. When you're trying to eradicate the Tuskegee Airmen and their accomplishments, that's not anti-DEI. What you're basically trying to do is you're trying to rewrite history so that only certain memories and certain people count. And that is not the will of God. And I think that's what makes this book and all of our books so dangerous. It's because we're saying that the effort to do what's happening in our country is the effort of a false religion, a false God, an idolatrous religion, and it must be called out. So I turn this over to Michael.
Yes, sir. Well, it's an honor to be on this panel with all of these distinguished thinkers and activists, and grateful to President Leela and to all the wonderful people, Professor Claudia and all the AAR folk. Look, they ain't read none of these books. Let's just yeah, I'd like to maybe Anthea's, okay. They probably read Anthea's book, but the rest of them, they ain't really read. This is history by word search. This is keywords, right? But not the way Raymond Williams envisioned it in his kind of cultural studies approach. This is not a Nietzschean genealogy or Foucaultian, genealogy. This ain't smart, right? The point is that the books are problems because they exist at all, right? The attempt to ban books is the attempt to ban minds, to ban bodies, that don't belong there. Look at Anthea Butler. Boom, that brilliance, and if I have permission, that beauty, that high intelligence, and that Black woman insistence that she be heard. They ain't used to that, right? Or white folk like Brother Jim and Brother Robbie, they're race traitors to them, right? So that's a problem. And Brother Bryan, professor at Fordham, at the heartbeat of Catholic America. What the heck? And then my own version and brand of irreverence. I got 2 books on there. It took 2 books to equal up to what Anthea's 1 book did. So I'm grateful that I had 2 books to be able to get banned. They ain't read them because what they would understand is that all of us are self-critical too. We ain't just cheerleading, quote, our side. We're engaged in serious analysis of what's happening in the world. So the first book to get banned was Long Time Coming, Reckoning with Race in America. These are a series of letters I wrote to martyrs of the movement. Why you mad at that? They're mad because those are martyrs, murdered by the insistence of white brothers and sisters that they live in what Gore Vidal called the United States of amnesia. And they want to stay there. And our books are not passports into the United States of amnesia. They are insistence that we join the kingdom of memory. My second book to be banned is Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America. I call white folk beloved in the book. I'm a nice guy. I'm saying nice things, but hard stuff, as all of our books do, insisting and demanding that white brothers and sisters come to grips with what has hurt them. Martin Luther King Jr. in jail in Birmingham said to his jailer, because the jailer said, what you're doing is wrong. King said, no, it's right. They go back and forth, and he finally says, how much money do you make? And when the jailer tells him, he said, hell, you need to be out here marching with us because white supremacy hurts you. So I'll end by saying, you know, any self-respecting scholar of religion has to entertain the possibility of atheism, right? Because Martin Luther King Jr. said, when I look at their churches and look at what they're doing, I wonder who their God is. So you got to be a respectable atheist, because I don't believe in that religion. A religion that says you can lynch me, say the Lord's Prayer, pronounce benediction, and go on your way. I don't know that God, and I'm uninterested in investing time and energy in that. So I think our books challenge the dominance of a certain narrow perspective. And if they would read them one day, it would be beautiful. I think all of us would come talk to the Naval Academy for free. And, you know, maybe the AAR can sponsor a lectureship where we go there and talk about the stuff that's been banned.
That's a great suggestion, and I'm going to go check with our budget if we have it in the budget. Thank you so much for these introductory contextualizations. There are a couple of questions that are coming in the chat. I want to encourage other people to ask questions, post them in the question and answer chat function. One thing that strikes me as interesting about your statements is that you're actually all quite invested in Christianity and in a healthy self-reflective Christianity. And as I was reading about some of the books, I'm quoting here from Christian Scholars Review of Anthea's book, White Evangelical Racism Makes for Tough Reading, but we should do well to drop our defenses to listen and to see what grows. That's not a really super progressive left-wing publication, right? And there are similar quotes from Christianity Today and other such works. So these books, or some of them at least, are not the radical atheist trashing Christianity books. There are, in many ways, what Bryan just said, and Jim as well, they're very invested in the history and in the kind of revolutionary and productive potential of Christianity. Is it simply that people aren't reading the books, aren't understanding them, or is it really that there are completely different versions of Christianity at play here?
Completely different versions. I mean, I think you have to really understand that, you know, there are Christianities, plural. There's not just Christianity. And I say this to people because, you know, some of the people who really liked my book were actually the atheists and the agnostics, because they were like, I finally understand what's going on here. And I think what's important is that it's not so much as I'm trying to save Christianity. Christianity has to save itself. That's not my job. I'm not God. But I think what is really important is that Christians start to see themselves where they stand, where they put their feet, where they sit in a pew, how they think about what it is that they do. And I think a lot of people in this country have decided that as long as it doesn't bother me, I can be for these people. I don't have to worry. They're going to take care of my, you know, my finances. I don't have to sit by people I don't want to sit by, you know, whether they're immigrants or something else. But I think what our books do is to challenge that hegemonic viewpoint of white American Christianity, which is a thing of in and of itself that is detrimental to the flourishing of human beings.
I think, Claudia, you hit the head nail on the head, and I agree with Anthea that what we're doing is we're surfacing and treating a question that is as old as the country It's as old as Frederick Douglass, who during the controversies over enslavement drew a distinction between the Christianity of Jesus Christ and the Christianity of this land, the Christianity of America. And this is a clash, a conflict that is as old as this country's investment in the doctrine of white supremacy. That the investment in the doctrine of white supremacy has always had a Christian component, or at least a pseudo-Christian component that's tried to cloak it with what Peter Berger called a sacred canopy of legitimation. And yet that canopy of legitimation has never gone unchallenged, not only in the African-American theological tradition, but by others of goodwill as well, as Robbie points out in his book. And so, yes, I think we are deeply invested in this because, and Thea doesn't want to save Christianity. I don't think that I can save Christianity. I'm not that messianic, but I am deeply invested in saying that I don't want my faith to be co-opted any longer by forces of injustice. And I say forces of injustice because we're not only dealing with white supremacy here, we're dealing with white supremacist patriarchy. Because we need to also underscore that while our books deal with religion and race, many of these books that are banned also deal with LGBTQ issues and gender issues, and this is all of one piece. To put it in Catholic language, this is a seamless garment, a consistent ethic of hatred and intolerance, and it's being done in the name of Jesus. And Jesus doesn't need me to defend him, but I need for my own integrity to say, I need to speak out because I can't belong to a faith that is being co-opted this way and not speak up. For my own integrity, I have to speak. Otherwise, I have to leave and become an atheist, as Michael says.
So Bryan, it's notable to me and Anthea too. Frederick Douglass has come up a couple of times, and that the most famous place where he writes that is in the appendix of his autobiography that was published when 1845. What else happens in 1845? That's the breakaway of the Southern Baptists from their Northern Baptists over the issue of slavery, and again declaring we Christians, Baptists in the South, are with the enslavers. We are the enslavers and we are with them. And we think that Jesus is too. Like that's the claim. And so when Douglass is saying the slave auctioneer's bell and the church going bell ring together, and that indictment of, we've had Bibles, or we've had enslaved people sold to buy Bibles, right? Those kinds of things. Like that's the deep contradictions that we're trying to wrestle with, I think, in these books. And again, it's not about tearing down Christianity, but it is about, in many ways, and that word integrity, Bryan, I think is so important, right? And that's what it's about. How can you have integrity, right? If that's the root of the tradition and you've never dealt with that root of the tradition, you can't. There's no way you can have integrity. And I think for Jim and I talked a lot about this. So it's a scholarly book, but it's also a very personal book for me, White Too Long. And that what's at stake there is that sense of integrity. How can we be, how could I have grown up thinking of myself as white and Christian? And how can I move into a faith with integrity, knowing that history, right? And so it's not about, something out there. It really is about figuring out how can there be a faith with integrity. The only way to do is to really deal with this past in order to kind of shed some of that awful white supremacist history, right? That's so entangled with the faith, and to move toward something that looks closer to, the words of Jesus, that moves closer to something we could actually feel like we could want to hand down to a new generation, and then embraces sort of everyone here and isn't a tool of white supremacy.
Let me pick up on that word integrity, because for white Christianity, the phrase, it's an idolatry. White Christian, white evangelical, when the adjective shapes and defines and destroys the noun, something has gone wrong here in the white faith that has been proclaimed. So I remember I had a meeting with a number of denominational leaders, heads of mainline denominations, mostly predominantly white churches. And instead of saying, why don't you stand up and be strong like black churches? I said, you all are pastors, right? You're pastors of these huge denominations. They said, yeah, we're pastors. Well, how are you going to pastor people who have become captive to a false religion, what I call the false white gospel? I said, your people need healing. Your white people need healing from a false white gospel. How are you doing that? What's your pastoral obligation to try and find the integrity of faith again for all of the people in your denomination who are white? So this is personal for Robbie and I. We have our own long histories of really being saved by the truth. So how do denominational leaders, how do they take pastoral responsibility for the false and captive religion that many of their white constituents are living under, and therefore not living out their faith and being taken away from Jesus, taken away from Jesus? I'm an evangelical background, close to Jesus. Yes, let's get close to Jesus. And in fact, help to restore the integrity of faith in the white community.
Mm. Yeah, I think also, you know, besides all the excellent things have been said, you know, as some of you here do, I preach in these churches a lot on Sunday, and I'm reminded of a statement at black churches primarily, though others as well. But Jesse Jackson said, "You got Martin Luther King Jr. on your wall, right? But Billy Graham in your pulpit." So that when especially Anthea's book about white evangelicalism, well, part of the argument to white evangelicals is there are black evangelicals too, and there are a whole lot of other non-white evangelicals out there who don't believe what you believe, right? In terms of policy, politics, and the public. But unfortunately, there is some convergence in theologies where we end up seeing the duplication of some very dangerous and destructive beliefs that are warehoused in our sanctuaries and then reproduced in our homiletics and in our theology. And I think one of the challenges is to get those folk in the congregation to also see that they're not being heretical and losing their faith by challenging the whiteness of the white evangelicals, because you're thinking if you're challenging the whiteness, then you're challenging Jesus, and therefore you're standing outside the sanctuary of truth. And I've seen that struggle go on time and again in some of our churches. And I think it's healthy to have books like those who have been written by the folk on this webinar today to really challenge some of the narrow thinking that has really entrapped many of our, you know, ordinary believers.
If I can pick up on that, and one of the things we need to do in terms of calling out the white supremacy of our country, and we talked about this in different ways, is that we need to challenge the complicity of the church and of Christianity. And there's a question in the chat that's directed to about the Catholic. It's asking about the Catholic bishops and their statement in 2018, where a statement on a pastoral letter on racism, "Open wide our hearts," and they said, "What are the Catholic bishops saying about these book bans and the other efforts of the Trump administration?" And sadly, the short answer to that question is they're not saying much at all. Okay. What the Catholic bishops have said, what little they have said, it's been around immigration, and even that has been very tepid. About other efforts of the administration, especially efforts around the restriction of trans lives, the bishops have actually spoken in praise of this. And this is not surprising. The Catholic Church has a long history of tepid, anemic I will even go so far as to say pathetic engagement with the reality of white supremacy in this country. And I'm going to go on a limb here and say that when I found out that the Naval Academy Library had purged my book, I thought to myself, well, the Naval Academy is only catching up to the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, because the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops had banned my book from their website for many years now. I think we need to be honest about this and say that the largely white leadership of many of our denominations, and here I'm speaking specifically about the Catholic Church, when they do speak about racism, it's in very tepid and anemic ways. The 2018 statement, for example, is infamous for using the passive voice over and over again. It happened that Black people were not welcome in neighborhoods. It happened that they were not hired for positions of responsibility. And they never addressed the question, well, who didn't do the hiring? Who didn't do the welcoming? And why weren't they welcome? And why weren't they hired? When the only condemnation they have in that 2018 document is when they're talking about police violence and the misuse and the abuse of police authority. But even there, note what happens there. And I'm paraphrasing, but I'm being very accurate here when they said, we must admit that many of our citizens of color have had negative interactions with police. However, we condemn violent rhetoric directed against police authorities. The only condemnation is not about white supremacy, it's not about racism, it's about rhetoric of criticism directed against police authority. And so what we see there is, even when the Catholic Church speaks officially, it speaks in ways that give comfort to the ideology of white supremacy. So I put it this way, is that the Catholic Church speaks about race in America in ways that are carefully calculated not to overly disturb or discomfort white people. And if that is your dominant way of approach, then you're going to be, the statements you give are going to be weak, anemic, tepid, if not ineffective, and indeed complicit.
Bryan, can I just say one more thing that it just needs to be pointed out as a historian? The Catholic Church has been into banning books for centuries, okay? So, like, why would they say anything about a book ban of our books when this has kind of been what the church has done, right? This follows in with Christian history, period. So I just wanted to put that out there as a way to sort of think about what is it that, the Catholic bishops are acquiescing to. And I know you're nice, but I'm not going to be nice on this particular statement. We can count a handful of bishops that are worth a damn in this country, and the rest of them are trying to figure out how they're going to hide out. And the ones that are doing something like Bishop Seitz and others who are fighting against, the immigration draconian policies here, there was just a big survey that was done that talks about how many people are going to be lost out of parishes if this idea about taking in immigrants and deporting them continues, or what I'd like to say is called rendition, because that's actually what they're really doing to people, is renditioning them to other countries. So I think it's important to say our books bring up something about racism, but it also touches on lots of different issues that impinge upon racism, like immigration. Because when Trump came down that escalator, we all need to remember what he said about Mexicans being rapists and everything else. People don't remember this stuff. They act like they don't have a memory. But I'm here to remind you that this vilification of people who are within our midst, who do all this work, who have slaved themselves and paid taxes, and now he wants to use the tax system against them on tax day, right? To go look up immigrants' records to deport them. This is a travesty. And I will jump into this next question that comes from the AAR president, Leila Prasad, where she says, after the bans and other attempts to silence, what is it that cannot be taken away from you? You can't take my humanity away from me. No matter if you want to act as inhumane as possible, you can't take that. But that goes for all the rest of the people whose humanity that they are trying to take away from them by vilifying them. And I think this is what we have to keep coming back to over and over again. Books are not just books. Books are written by people who are thinkers. Books are written for people to read. Books are written so that you will gain knowledge and gain information. And if we hold that from people, then what you are doing is trying to dehumanize others by something. And I think that's the important part that I don't want people to lose from this conversation today.
I want to just jump in with two parallels that I think have come up with for me and maybe shifted into politics. We've been talking a lot about the church. I'm really glad we're having that conversation, but I want to shift it like into politics and academic freedom and the function of universities as well. The two things that kind of echo in my mind are in White Too Long, I write about the United Daughters of the Confederacy and what their program was about after the Civil War. They were the huge, over 100,000 women who were involved after the Civil War, basically trying to redeem the idea of the Confederacy. And the two things that they did are exactly what we're seeing this administration doing. One of them was a cultural program where they were erecting statues all over the country to the lost cause, to the glory of the lost cause, that all had these, God will vindicate in Latin mottos on them. We're about to see that next year. Is when everybody buckle up in 2026. We are absolutely going to see a white supremacist glorification of a certain view of the country in statues and in granite and bronze. That is coming. This is a prelude in many ways to that. The other thing the United Daughters of the Confederacy did is they banned books and they wrote their own books and replaced the old books with their own books here, and they rewrote history. And so that's really what we're seeing here as well. The other thing, the image, when I wrote about this in my Substack newsletter over at whitetolong.net, the image that I used actually was Bibelplatz in Berlin. And if you conjure an image of a book burning, it's probably Berlin. That's the one you're envisioning with people throwing these big heaps. There's a memorial there today that's sunken below the pavement, and it's a library with empty shelves. If you look down through this you're standing over it, you look down through this plexiglass window, and it says empty shelves. But that was May 10, 1933, when members of the Nazi German Student Union and their professors burned books. And why? Against the un-German spirit. That was the kind of key motivator there. And so I think we've seen these echoes here. And I just want to echo what Anthea said earlier. This is coming for us. This is no, sort of like small dress rehearsal. This is an attack on one of the most prestigious academic institutions in the country, right? Starting from, institution up at the top. And it will be coming for a university near you unless we all stand up and speak out.
Yeah.
The other thing that raises, Robbie, is that this suppression of truth through the active rewriting of the narrative. I mean, we've seen this before, of course, but I think we need to look at the political consequences of this. There is a medieval theologian whose name I cannot remember right now, but he wrote that truth is the basis, the mother, and the foundation of justice. In other words, if you don't have truth, what are you ruled by? A society that actively suppresses truth cannot be just. And it can only be ruled by fear and by force. And so I think we need to see what's going on here, that if we don't speak up against these efforts to censor, restrict, suppress truth, and again, this is not new, but we're seeing it with an aggressive virulence now that we have not seen for a long time. And it is deliberate and it's calculated. If this succeeds, then the only way we can live in this country and will live in this country is we'll be ruled by fear and we'll be ruled by force. And I think that this is not alarmist. This is just real. This is reality. And if we don't stand up and speak out now, if we don't engage in active struggle now, and I know we all have careers to worry about, because there are questions in the chat about junior scholars, and I'm not minimizing anyone in their position of precarity, but I mean, at this point, we need to stop thinking about our careers and start thinking about how we're going to exist in this society. I mean, this is how basic it is. What's at stake is not our career. What's at stake is not our university. What's at stake is what what little bit of putative freedom many of us have in this country is being eroded actively. And so I think we need to start naming what's really at stake here. And people need to wake up and see what's happening.
Leela asks in her question, uh, uh, what can't be taken away from you? What is your 1 acre of land that can't be confiscated? Dear friend, a friend of mine, a young woman of color running for elected office, other day said to me, all we have is our faith. All we have is our faith. And so that's what is at stake now, not just democracy, but a test of our faith. And what you're hearing from us is, in fact, calling for the restoration of true faith, the restoration of true faith. This is a time when faith has to stand up. And all of us have to ask what the cost would be. Bonhoeffer talked about costly discipleship, standing up for what it means to follow Jesus. And he said, when a madman is tearing through the crowd in his car, running over all kinds of people, a pastor on the scene can say, do I just console and bury the victims, or do I try to stop the car, stand in front of the car and stop the car? So to do that now for us, what do we do to stop this car? It's not just to defend democracy. It's to stand up for our faith and show people. As a kid, Anthea, I grew up in white evangelicalism in Detroit, as you know, and it was black evangelicals in Detroit who saved my soul and saved my faith. So I want to save the faith of white people who've lost their faith to white religion. I want to save their faith. But that means a lot of us are going to have to take risk and stand up and often do things we're not sure what the consequence will be. We're not sure if they'll be effective or not. I don't know how to stop the car, but we have to figure out trying to stop the car is the only way to stop the car. And so how do we do that as academics, as activists, as people of faith, as people who have those that we love? I just had my first grandson 3 days ago. So that's my source of joy and hope right now, but I want to stand up for him. I want to stand up for him. So how do we stand up right now, not just be against, but stand up in favor of what it means to restore the true faith that Frederick Douglass called us to a long time ago?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the question, right? I also think about Frederick Douglass when he said, to paraphrase him, literacy unfits a child for slavery, right? And or I guess George Clinton put it, free your mind and your ass will follow. I guess that's the Clintonian interpolation there. But the thing is that you got to remember this, though. Even though I began rather flippantly, but seriously at the same time about they ain't really reading these books, somebody is. And that's the problem for them. That we can't underplay what we do as thinkers and scholars, because you can never tell where your book will end up. I'm sure all of us were surprised. Well, damn, I didn't know the Naval Academy even had my book. Okay. To be banned, in order to be banned, the book got to be there. Somebody there made the choice to have our books there. So that means our books are already getting to places we don't even know. We don't even know how they're shaping the minds. The great philosopher Tupac Shakur said, I might not, change the world, but I'll be damned if I won't spark the brain that will. And so literacy is a force in an era when they're trying to ban our books. That is faith in the ability to articulate ideas that link to human communities, that transform human lives, that open spaces for freedom. And I think that we don't want to underestimate the value of what we do. You know, when people say play your position and stay in your lane, well, the lane we're in as thinkers and writers and professors and preachers and teachers is an extremely important one. And to answer, President Prasad's, point, what can't be taken is what you have, as everybody has already said, what you have inside. Don't, you know, take what you do with deadly seriousness, but don't take yourself too seriously at all. It is enough, O Lord, now take away my life, for I'm not better than my fathers and mothers, right? Elijah says, and God says, slow down, get something to eat, stand up. There are others who have not sold out. And if we can understand that we have greater community, I believe that we can't overinterpret the loss at the polls in suggesting that there was such a sea change and a paradigm shift, as opposed to if we had a few more people who believe what we believe coming out, the entire system would have reflected differently. So I don't want to capitulate to the cynicism or the belief that what these fascists and these authoritarians are expressing is the mind of most of America. But we've got to fight for that other mind. We got to fight for the other spirit in this nation that says we will not surrender to this. And Anthea talked about, black women. Black women, people, I saw this Axios report, well, black people are not on the front lines. Bro, we've been dealing with this from the beginning. Racism is a dry run for fascism. Racism is a rehearsal for what you see happening going on. So the point is, now all of America is black. We thought you weren't going to do that to us. We're white people. And he don't know the difference. So we're all honorarily black right now. We're all symbolically blackened. So what that means is we turn to the very people. My pastor used to say, we've already come through what we've come to. So we have been here. We have forcefully grappled with this, and I think we can't lose sight of the lessons taught by our ancestors and our mothers and fathers. That's what can't be taken away from us at the end of the day.
I want to address the question that was put in the chat about people asking questions about help, and also to junior faculty and grad students. So let me start with junior faculty and grad students first. You are in a very crucial time right now. The university is not what it was. You need to really seriously think about what it is you're writing and what you're doing. I am not saying to you that you need to change that, but you need to think about how that is going to be received and whether or not publishers and others will publish your work, because that's actually a really important thing to say. You can see how these universities are capitulating in one way or the other. People are not as great as President Eisengruber at Princeton or like Harvard to push back. You may not be in an institution that's like that. You need to read the signs of the times and figure out what to do. I have personally only told my graduate student that you need to hurry up and get the hell out, like now. Like, you need to finish, and you need to finish, and you need to think about alternative things that you can do, because this is a moment and this is going to be messed up for a long time. What I really want to say to everybody on this call, and to say this as clearly as I possibly can, is that the destruction of all of these systems that are going on around you right now are not going to be put back together anytime soon. You need to understand that this is going to be chaos for a while, and you need to learn how to live through the chaos. That's number one. Number two, if you are asking those of us what to do and how to think, the first thing you do is to be in community. You need to be in some kind of community where you are thinking about mutual aid for each other, how you're going to protect each other, who's got each other's back, who can you trust, who can you not trust, okay? Because you're not going to make it through a time like this if you don't have other people. It may be that you're thinking about losing a career or all of that other stuff. Let me tell you that you can get another job, but you cannot get another person. You can't get another you. And right now, the most important part is that there are people who are going to be physically, emotionally, and mentally compromised because of the things that are happening right now. And you need to think about how to be in a support system to do that. If you can get out in the street, get out in the streets. Some of you have probably seen the memes about Black women not doing this anymore. Well, guess what? The reason why some of us are not doing this anymore is because we've been doing it for you. And now it is time for you to do it for us and do it for this country. We are tired. We have carried this thing on our back the whole time, and it's time for you to step up and take responsibility.
Thank you. And Anthea, you already anticipated my invitation to have some final remarks from our esteemed panelists. So thank you for starting that off. If any of the other ones want to give some final remarks, calls to action, complaints, recommendations, please go ahead.
Black women, some people in the chat have commented upon the picture that's behind me, and that is a picture of Sister Antona Ebo. She was a sister of Selma, one of the 5 Catholic sisters, and the only Black Catholic sister who showed up when King issued his call to continue the march from Selma to Montgomery. And she marched, and she, to put it bluntly, caught some hell for showing up in her, pre-Vatican II full nun's garb, and people are saying, well, what are you doing? You're supposed to be in the convent, you're supposed to be in the school, you're supposed to be being a good nun. And she said, I am here because I am Black, because I am Catholic, because I am a nun, and because I want to bear witness. And this is the kind of story and truth that is being actively suppressed right now. The reason why our books are banned right now is because we dare to uplift stories like this. And now what I'm going to say finally is that it's time for each of us to take our place in the long chain of witnesses of people who have worked to make this country better. And yes, it's going to be hard. And yes, there are risks. And yes, it's not going to be easy. But as Anthea said, there have been a number of folks along the way who have already been out there taking risk and not being easy, and not taking an easy path. So I'm going to end by quoting that great sage Dumbledore, who in Harry Potter said, there will come a time when you have to choose between what is easy and what is right. And if we're calling our institutions to make that choice, we have to be willing to make that choice as well.
Yeah, Bryan, I may just follow on that. That's really what I've been thinking. It's been so clear to me that, particularly listening to you and Anthea and Michael, one of the key differences between the Christianities, particularly by race, between white Christianities and African-American Christianities, is that white Christianities seem to think that discipleship is comfortable, right? And that the purpose of church is to be comfortable or to be respected or respectable, propriety, rules, right? And I think the thing that, and it's true of academics too, right? That academics, it's a comfortable life, right? If you can sort of land that job and get tenure and all, it's a comfortable life. But I think the thing we're all going to have to buckle up for here is that it's going to cost us something to stand up. And we've got, the idea that we're going to be able to stand up and not lose something is ridiculous. We're going to have to be prepared to kind of decide, and make that choice, as you said, Bryan, like, are we going to choose right? Are we going to choose justice and let the consequences be what the consequences be? Are we willing to do that? And we're all love to think about, what we do in the civil rights movement, what would we have done during Nazi Germany? We're about to find out what we would have done in those moments, I think. And that's particularly true for white folks, I think. The last thing I'll say is just kind of go back to the kind of banning. I described it, the thing, kind of reflections I wrote, as book bans are, an aggressive form of lying. That's really what they are. They're about erasing the past. They're about kind of steering us toward a different kind of future. And that's really what we have to kind of, I think, be very clear about. And there are some actions real quick. There's some in the chat, but churches, by the way, are great places to find homes for banned books. So if you got a church that kind of have a bookshelf for books that have been banned in religious studies, that's a great place for those. There is actually a retired Navy commander who's named in the New York Times article, named William Marks, who actually started a GoFundMe. The link is in the chat. He is actually setting up a GoFundMe. He's already exceeded its goal to buy all the books, the 381 books on the list, and make them available at Old Fox Books in Annapolis for any midshipman who wants to come pick them up. Right. So that's a nice creative workaround. We're going to need more of that kind of, I think, efforts as well. And I'll end with this kind of to like, let's do something. So my wife's Jewish. We just had Passover, celebrated Passover here, and there's a kind of teaching that stayed with me on the Jewish side of things, often translated from the Ethics of the Fathers, but it's this saying: you are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. Right. So we may not all, or any of us in our single efforts, be able to fix it. Right. But that doesn't mean we aren't obligated to stand up and do what we can do.
I'll just say one of my dear mentors, tutors, teachers, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, taught us the difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is often a feeling, a mood, a personality type, maybe our analysis. But hope is deeper, he taught us. Hope is not a mood or a feeling, it's a decision you make because of this thing that we call faith. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And my best paraphrase of that is, hope means believing in spite of the evidence and then watching the evidence change. A whole lot of Black Christians have not been optimistic, but have maintained that hope. And so a lot of us right now, hope is core to our faith. It's core to what we call faith. And it's not for us an option, it's an obligation. And hope doesn't mean you always win, as people on this call can testify to. You don't always win, but we have to make a choice because of our faith to act in hope right now, despite the consequences. It's time to act in hope. And a whole lot of young people, I'm teaching this afternoon, 40 students are graduating this spring. And what they want to ask is, where do you find your hope? Where do you find your hope? And we have to find a way to show them where we find our hope, regardless of whether we win this round or lose. Hope is, in fact, believing in spite of the evidence and then watching the evidence change.
Yeah. Amen. I'll just briefly add, to the point that all of us have made in part and in passing. People talk about who's working and who's not. Well, I started off, I'm from Detroit too. I worked in the factory, not for a summer job. You got to work in shifts. Everybody can't work 24 hours. In fact, nobody does, right? Except in extraordinary circumstances and not for long. So if you got the first shift, you got the second shift, you got the third shift. And so I think, as Anthea talked about, in terms of Black women, then others got to get on the front line in the shift of work that they've been assigned or that they take up, because everybody can't do everything. When I was doing the windows, I wasn't doing the fenders. When I was doing the fenders, I wasn't doing the wheels. And so we have to really understand about sharing that load and responsibility. And think about Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said, not all are guilty, but all are responsible. So when people say, well, it wasn't me and my people weren't here and we didn't do that and we didn't hate these, well, you've benefited from the silence and the complicity in a system that rewarded you against your will, forced you to take advantages that you did not consciously express. We can't allow that anymore, to allow people to duck and dodge and avoid our responsibility to work where we are. And then in terms of hope, I think, thinking of that Rhino Niebuhr and Bishop Tutu distinction between optimism and hope, I think about Howard Thurman, who said, refuse the temptation to scale down your dreams to the immediate event you confront. And he talked about our slave foreparents and what they did and how they, in their own minds and spirits, imagined a different world. They couldn't specify what it looked like. They didn't know the furniture, but they knew that it would exist and how it would come into being. And so he said, you got a choice. You can be a prisoner of the event you confront, or you can be a prisoner of hope. And I think that those of us who choose to be prisoners of hope don't do so because we ignore the realities that we confront. It is the fact that we know that with that hope, we are able to transform our situation and circumstance. Another election is coming, an election after that. We got to fight back against the fascists. We see what's going on in the courts. We see what's going on with some schools that have been brave, and others must become brave again. And those institutions of which we are part, we can help inspire that courage. And I think us coming together in this moment and so many others like this will chip away at the architecture of fascism so that we can establish beachheads of freedom that allow us really to resonate with the power that a transformative hope can bring to us.
Amen. And I hardly ever say that, but I thank you very, very much for your inspiring work and your words here. Many people in the chat agreed with that. I want to end by encouraging everyone in attendance to do something. It might be that it's buy a book, read a book, write a book, gift a book. The links are in the chat. The recording of this webinar will be available on the AAR website in about a week. It also will be available on Robbie Jones, Substack, and others, other websites. So if you have friends, colleagues, or people who may really need to watch this in order to rethink their position, please feel free to recommend it to them. Again, many thanks for your wonderful work and for joining us today.